Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 245, Eric Homer. Eric Matthew Homer was born on the 22nd of December 1907 in Rockdale, New South Wales. He was the son of Ernest Homer and Florence Pritchard. Eric's Royal Australian Navy Service record shows his date of birth as the 22nd of December 1905, no doubt to be eligible to enlist, as he would have only been 17 at the time. He was discharged for desertion on the 5th of October 1925. He's listed in the New South Wales Police Gazette, Eric Matthew Homer, ordinary seaman, born in New South Wales, 20 years of age, 5 foot 9 inches high, fresh complexion, light brown hair, blue eyes and a birthmark on the right thigh, from the HMAS Penguin at Sydney on the 14th of October 1925. When he was 18, on the 7th of July 1926, he and Ruby Hilda Doris Isbister, who was 17, had a son, Roy Charles Homer, in Sydney. Only a week after his son's birth, he's listed as being released as a first offender being discharged under the Crimes Act of 1900. Eric Matthew Homer, 20, North Sydney Police Court, 9th of June 1926 for stealing, 1 month and 3 days hard labour. Eric married Ruby on the 10th of December 1927 in Neutral Bay, and they had a second child, Edna Joyce Homer, on the 26th of April 1928. In January 1930, in Darlington, New South Wales, Eric's listed as a gardener and is living with Ruby Hilda, but by December 1930, he was living in Waterloo alone. In 1930, he was listed again in the New South Wales Police Gazette, Mossman. A warrant has been issued by the North Sydney bench for the arrest of Eric M. Homer, charged with stealing the sum of £2 and 10 shillings, the property of Ethel Banfield of Mossman, on the 6th of September 1930. Offender is 23, 5 foot 9 inches high, with a thin build, fair complexion and hair, clean shaved. Usually dressed in grey clothes, grey felt hat and black shoes. A gardener, is said to be now tramping in the country, probably in the Lismore district. In 1931, he was working on a property at Gundabark at southwest Taree. On the 26th of April 1932 in Taree, Eric committed bigamy by marrying Beatrice Griffiths. Beatrice was 4 years older than Eric, and they would have met when they both lived at Cranbrook, New South Wales, which is near Gundabark. They had 3 children together: Gordon Athol Homer, born in 1932, who died at the age of 10, Mavis Heather, who died in January 1942, and Victor, who died in 1933. In court, Ruby said that Eric asked her for a divorce in September 1932. This was 5 months after he married Beatrice. In the Manning River Times, an advocate for the Northern Coast Districts of New South Wales, a Taree newspaper, there was an article titled Alleged Bigamy on the 17th of September 1932. Eric Matthew Homer, 26, labourer, was committed for trial in the Central Police Court on Wednesday on a charge of bigamy. He was alleged to have married Ruby Hilda Doris Isbister at Neutral Bay on the December the 10th, 1927, and to have gone through a form of marriage with Beatrice Griffiths at Taree on the 26th of April 1932, while Ruby Isbister was still alive. Detective Sergeant Hayes gave evidence that Homer had admitted marrying a second time, knowing his first wife was still alive. When charged at the North Sydney Police Station, Homer said, "I intend to plead guilty. I don't want to cause any bother over it, and I'm going to do the best I can to support the women." And at the Sydney Court of Sessions, Judge Lewis commended the fine spirit of a wife who agreed to divorce her husband on condition that he married the second woman with whom he had gone through a bigamous marriage. Eric Matthew Homer, 26, the husband, said he'd married the second woman because he had got her into trouble and her people threatened to disown her. His first wife had left him. He was prepared to marry the second woman as soon as the divorce went through. At the time of the bigamous marriage, he was under the impression that he'd been divorced. Judge Lewis bound him over to be of good behaviour and directed that he contribute £2, 2 shillings and 6 pence a week for the support of his first wife. So it took 4 months, but on the 18th of January 1933, Ruby Hilda Doris Homer put in a petition for a divorce from Eric Matthew Homer. On the 6th of April 1933 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Frederick Chilton Morehouse, 26 labourer, and Edward Cyril Homer, 25 gardener, pled guilty to 2 charges of breaking and entering. They were each sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment on each charge concurrent. By 1936, Eric was living at Camaray, New South Wales, a suburb of Sydney, and working as a rigger. He is listed without his wife in the census. On December the 9th, 1938, in North Sydney, Eric married for the 3rd time, again committing bigamy, using the name Edward Cyril Homer by marrying Mabel Nellie Christina Amelia Smith Clapham. Amazingly, he married for the 4th time to Edith May Starr, only 5 months later, on the 14th of April 1939 in Redfern, using the names Osmond Homer and Osmond Pritchard. Only 3 weeks later, on the 3rd of May 1939 in the Newcastle Sun, faces 2 charges of bigamy, wife's story to court, in Sydney. That he had married 3 women since December 1927 was alleged against Eric Matthew Homer, 31, cleaner, at the North Sydney court today when he faced 2 charges of bigamy. Homer was charged with having, on the 12th of April, falsely describing himself as Edward Cyril Homer and married Mabel Clapham, while his lawful wife, Ruby Hilda Doris Homer, whom he married on December the 10th, 1927, was alive. He was also charged with having, on the 14th of April at Botany, while falsely describing himself as Osmond Pritchard, commonly known as Osmond Homer, married Edith May Starr. Constable Macney said that on the 18th of April he saw Homer in a room at Union Street in North Sydney and told him he had a warrant for his arrest. Homer replied, "I thought you would have picked me up before." Ruby Hilda Doris Homer of Alexandria said that she and Homer were married at Neutral Bay on the 10th of December 1927. They lived together for 2 years, and in September 1932 her husband asked her for a divorce as he wanted to marry another girl. The witness said she never divorced her husband. However, she got the divorce papers, but she said her husband told her that he changed his mind. Mrs. Homer said that she had since taken steps to have a divorce and wished to proceed with the divorce as soon as possible. Evidence was also given by the other women concerned in the charges. Homer was committed for trial and being allowed bail of £100. Homer said, "I wish to plead guilty to both counts," and he added that he wanted the case disposed of as soon as possible. On the 11th of May 1939 in the Daily News of Perth, man named Homer tries 4 wives. Judge Kalouis warned 32-year-old Eric Matthew Homer at the Sydney Quarter Sessions, "This habit of getting married will grow on you if you are not careful." Homer, the judge was told, had contracted 3 bigamist marriages. The judge said that there must be something obviously wrong with Homer and remanded him for medical observation. Homer pled guilty to 2 charges of bigamy, one at North Sydney in December 1938 and the other one at Neutral Bay in April 1939. He'd previously been convicted of bigamy in 1932. His genuine marriage had taken place in 1927. When asked to explain the reasons for his conduct, Homer spoke of hard luck that had overtaken him in his life and of his wish to find a woman who would become interested in him and his work. His last marriage, he said, was on a Friday night, and he spent the Saturday and Sunday in bed delirious. Previously, he'd fallen from a roof and suffered concussion. He said he'd been under terrific strain and twice attempted suicide. He would do everything possible to have the unlawful marriages annulled, he said. "You need not bother about that. They're already annulled," the judge told him. And on the 22nd of May 1939 in Sydney, a sentence of 3 years' imprisonment was passed at the Sydney Quarter Sessions today on Eric Matthew Homer, 32, contractor, who pled guilty to bigamy. The medical report, the judge said today, disclosed that though Homer was not physically well, he was sane. The offences of the prisoner, the judge continued, were deliberate. He deceived 3 women into the belief that he was free to marry them. The jail records showed that Homer had also committed bigamy some years ago. His Honour, in imposing the sentence, said that after reading a medical report, he was convinced that Homer acted quite deliberately in the offences he had committed. Homer had married 1 woman and on different occasions had gone through a form of marriage with 3 others. His marriage with Mabel Clapham was annulled 6 months after their marriage and when Eric was in jail. In the Sydney Morning Herald on the 31st of October 1939, Clapham falsely called Homer versus Homer.
Mabel Nellie Christina Emila Smith Clapham, falsely called Homer, was granted a decree returnable in 3 months for the nullity of her marriage with Eric Matthew Homer, otherwise known as Edward Cyril Homer, and the respondent was ordered to pay the costs. The petitioner stated in evidence that she went through a form of marriage with the respondent at St Peter's Manse in North Sydney on the 9th of December 1938 and lived with him for 3 weeks. She heard something and asked him if he'd been married before, and he said he had not. Subsequently, she found out that he had been married before, and on the 3rd of May of this year, she gave evidence at the North Sydney Police Court when he appeared on a charge of bigamy. Ruby Hilda Doris Homer, formerly Isbister, gave evidence that she was married to the respondent on the 10th of December 1927 in the Presbyterian Manse at Neutral Bay, and she lived with him for a very short time. On the 24th of June 1940, Eric enlisted in World War II. He was discharged as a signalman on the 24th of September 1940 after only 3 months' service. In his army records, he cites Beatrice as his next of kin. It says he was discharged as before his enlistment he had been convicted by a civil court for an offence that involved dishonesty or physical violence. And then it also added that he was also discharged in consequence of a civil conviction before the enlistment, which was bigamy. So in 1942, it seems that the divorce finally went through with Ruby Hilda Doris Homer. Records show that he married under the name of Cyril Edward Homer to Bridget Mary Bent in Chatswood, New South Wales in 1941. In 1945 in Newtown, New South Wales, Eric married again to Belinda Wakerer Fletcher, using his birth name. In 1949, they were living at Golden Grove in New South Wales and Eric was working as a builder. In 1953, he was listed as a co-respondent in the divorce of Carol Werbick and Marquita Werbick. Belinda and Eric divorced in 1958. In 1958, he's listed in the census in New South Wales at Granville as a painter, and in the same address is Marguerite Homer. In 1960 at Parramatta, Eric married Hannah Sarah Cooper when he was 53. Hannah divorced him on the 11th of December 1962. In 1963, he was living alone at Marryong, New South Wales, and still working as a painter. There's also a divorce recorded at the beginning of October in 1966 for an Edward Cyril Homer divorcing Bridget Mary Homer. And yet another record of a marriage in 1966 in Sydney. Edward Cyril Homer married Miriam Rose Porto, née Appleby. And Eric died on the 4th of June 1985 at Lidcombe, New South Wales, aged 77, under the name of Edward Cyril Homer. However, the family trees record his death as being on the 19th of September 1973 in Port Macquarie, New South Wales. And a little on his children. His firstborn was Roy Charles Homer, who was born on the 7th of July 1923 in Sydney. Roy enlisted in World War II at Cowra, New South Wales, listing his next of kin as Ruby Homer. In 1950, he married Betty Joyce Collings and they lived at Grays Point in New South Wales, and he died on the 5th of February 2009 at Kallingar in Queensland at the age of 82. The second child was Edna Joyce Homer, who was born on the 14th of April 1928 in Sydney. She died on the 28th of September 1947, aged only 19, on the Princess Highway in Sutherland Shire in Sydney. Her usual address was listed as 33 Calder Street in Redfern. Her cause of death was a fracture of the skull accidentally received through being thrown from a motorcycle on which she was a pillion passenger. There was an article that outlined this accident on the 29th of September 1947 in the Sydney Morning Herald. Girl and 3 men dead. A girl and 3 men, in which the girl and 2 of the men were pillion riders, were killed in motorcycle accidents during the weekend. The girl was killed yesterday afternoon when 2 motorcycles travelling in the same direction collided at Sutherland while one was passing another. Another girl pillion rider on the other motorcycle, Phyllis Willoughby, 18 of Wellington Street, Bondi, was admitted to St George's Hospital suffering from concussion and other head injuries. Riders of the 2 motorcycles were George Marshall, 23 of Tempe, and Joseph Sarouse, 24 of Paddington, and they escaped with cuts and bruises. Marshall and Miss Homer were engaged. Sarouse's motorcycle was passing Marshall's when they came into contact. Both motorcycles at once got out of control. Marshall swerved across the road, ran down an embankment, struck a wire fence, jumped over the top of it and stopped 60 yards from the spot where the motorcycles had touched. Miss Homer died immediately from shocking injuries. And on the 29th of September 1947 in the Sydney Morning Herald, her death was announced in the paper, Edna Joyce Homer, 28th of September 1947, as a result of an accident, dearly beloved daughter of Ruby and Eric and loved sister of Roy, aged 19 years. So the interesting story of Eric Matthew Homer and his many marriages.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.